are these people?
So as you guys know, because this was major news over the weekend for now, Israel decided to attack Iran over the weekend by laying them out. And right now, Iran is, I would say, doing a mini retaliation right now against Israel back. And so now, obviously, there's a lot of talk in Western media in terms of, oh, we have to go in and take them out because they have nuclear weapons and they're not afraid to use them and that kind of bullshit, like a la Iraq War vibes. Bringing us back to the early aughts, ladies and gentlemen. So, as we try to do here, we want to give, because obviously Western media has a bias, as they would, against people of color in this case, or at least hearing their views or perspective.
No, they would never. Sorry, I had to clutch some pearls real quick.
We always try to bring perspectives of multiple people and multiple groups of people where we can.
Multiple personality disorders.
Sure, but we want to give perspective to people whose voices are otherwise not heard. So I wanted to highlight this article from Truthout. This was written by Alex Shams, who we might try to interview. Like, I have to check into him a little bit more, but he seems legit enough. But he is familiar with what's going on in Palestine as he lived in Palestine. I think was a journalist there. So, but he reported with Truthout, "I'm afraid a bomb will kill me in my sleep. Iranians react to Israel's attacks. Israel has killed at least 250 Iranians as it strikes residential buildings, civilian infrastructure, and military bases." So there's a T there. So let's get into it. On June 13th, Israel launched a surprise attack on Iran. Airstrikes hit buildings across the capital, Tehran, striking residential neighborhoods as well as military sites. In just one night, close to 100 people were killed. Among the dead were dozens killed while asleep in their beds. The attack came after 8 months of calm, with not a single shot fired between Iran and Israel. Prior to the assault, Iran's Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei has given his blessing for peace talks with the United States. Over this past weekend, Donald Trump's representatives were due to meet with their Iranian counterparts to work on hashing out a deal. Now, this is a part that mainstream media I've noticed has not mentioned, because Trump was supposed to go over there on Sunday to work out a deal. And just before that happened, Israel decides to be messy.
And then in the dead of night, as Iranians lay asleep at home, the Fire Nation attacked. I'm sorry, Israel attacked.
Right.
Got it.
So,
ugh.
So yeah, just want to give you some perspective there, for those of you who may not know that. For Iranians like Kamar, a 29-year-old engineer living in Tehran, the massive assault came as a shock. "I was asleep when my aunt called. There was a big explosion near her house. All her windows had shattered. She was in panic," Kamar told Truthout. "I opened the blinds to look out my window. I saw a flash and bang. Suddenly, all around me, I could hear explosions. The earth was shaking. That's when I realized we were under attack." The New York Times and other Western media repeated Israel's military line that Israel was attacking Iran's nuclear program. But as the sun rose over the Iranian capital, it immediately became clear that the strikes had hit residential buildings.
Yep.
Doesn't sound like nuclear weapons to me.
Nope.
Multiple floors of skyscrapers were blown out in Kamarane and Noboran. I'm going to say these towns, so I apologize.
I would think.
Reading them.
Yeah.
Neighborhoods on the northeast side of the city. Entire buildings were leveled in Skatsarkhan on the west side. Videos emerged of sobbing families on the street in front of their homes, mourning loved ones killed in the strikes. Men with hands over their faces, shrieking in grief. Israel boasts it had killed several commanders of Iran's Revolutionary Guard and nuclear scientists. It also killed their families and dozens of people who happened to be in the apartments around them. Among the dead were Amir Ali Amini, an 11-year-old Taekwondo champion, Nifolar Akwavan, a Pilates instructor, and Eshan Esrahi, a bank teller, and his 9-year-old daughter, Baran.
As a child who did lots of Taekwondo tournaments, definitely feel the hurt on that one, you know?
Right.
So,
as the death toll rolls, shock waves went out across the Iranian capital. The first missiles hit just as I was saying my morning prayers. Yasmin, a 35-year-old English teacher, told me over the phone. As she spoke, the ringing of Israeli drones in Tehran's sky was audible. Later, my mother found out her friend's apartment had been bombed. Her children were killed in bed by the attack. Everyone on the floor below them was wounded. My mother has been sick ever since she heard the news, she said, holding back tears. We are paralyzed in fear. I'm afraid that a bomb will kill me in my sleep. In the days since, Israel has bombed Iran repeatedly, each with round often only a few hours apart. This has included missile strikes on civilian infrastructure, including fuel depots, oil refineries, and airports. On June 15th, car bombs were detonated in downtown Tehran.
among other, that's
Towers?
if that was anybody else, Israel would call that terrorism, by the way.
Right.
If car bombs happened, as well as I do believe I heard someone bringing in piles of drones, right? You know, and I think a lot of those caught, as far as Iran has been trying to catch Mossad agents, a lot of them from India, from what I saw, you know. So funny how that works. But allegedly, I'll say that, allegedly, you know. But anyway,
Towers across the city had their tops blown out. Ambulance raced to locate survivors in collapsed buildings. Every morning, crowds emerged to help the wounded, digging people out from below the rubble. Others wandered in a daze, shocked by how quickly their lives have turned upside down. The last time missile barrages fell on Tehran was 1988 when Saddam Hussein was bombing the country in a war where he received Western support. That same year, a U.S. air carrier shot down an Iranian airliner flying from Tehran to Dubai over the Persian Gulf, killing all 290 people aboard. Actually, remember that.
yep.
In the decades since, the city has experienced relative peace. While Israel has threatened Iran with war repeatedly, recently many hope that Trump will fulfill his promise to avoid a new Middle East war. The shock of the sudden attack was compounded by the hope many Iranians felt about the peace process. Until a few months ago, it seemed like our government would refuse to negotiate with Trump, Kamar told me. But then they agreed and things were moving forward. We are optimistic. And then Israel attacked us right in the middle of the negotiation.
Yep.
This wasn't the first time Iranians have been burned by the US. In 2015, Iran and the US under the Obama administration signed a Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, a nuclear deal that provided a framework of peace between the two countries. Iran complied with the deal. But 3 years later, during his first term, Trump ripped it up. Iranians put their faith in diplomacy, and then the United States betrayed its promises.
You would like some zoomings? Yeah.
Iran has launched several missile barrages against Israel in retaliation. The majority was shot down by Israel's Iron Dome, but several missiles hit military installations in the heart of Tel Aviv, as well as residential areas. Some hope the retaliation will act as a deterrent, pushing Israel to stop. But Israel has since hit back harder across Iran. Airstrikes targeting dozens of cities, border posts, nuclear sites, military bases, and the homes of ordinary people. Friday night was the worst night of my life. There were drones everywhere, flying super low. I can't think of a reason why they sent them except to terrify ordinary people. Samira, a 48-year-old journalist, told me over the phone from Tehran. And then we heard the anti-aircraft guns firing, and finally, booms and explosions as the missiles began to hit the city. And then, in the silence, the crying of children. And then we realized, fuck, this is war. It's exactly what we thought it would sound like. She expressed frustration at the media coverage she was seeing internationally.
As you would.
They say Israel has the right to defend itself, but they attacked us first, she said, as the sound of a drone buzzing above her filtered through our call. Israel says it's trying to stop us from getting a nuclear bomb, but Iran respects international conventions on its nuclear program. Meanwhile, Israel has nuclear bombs. And yes, has. And doesn't allow international inspectors in. They are the last people who should be giving an opinion on. Samira argued that the attack had convinced many Iranians that they could not depend on diplomacy with the rest of the world. When people in Iran sees Israel's attacks and how America is supporting them, they say, well, maybe the government is right to build a nuclear weapon because we're all alone in this world and no one is lifting a finger to stop Israel from killing us. Not only are world powers not stopping Israel, they are actively supporting its war in Iran. Foremost among them is Donald Trump. Even as he said he was hopeful about the nuclear deal and engaged in a widely publicized spat with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, Trump sent hundreds of missiles to Israel beforehand to give it its strongest hand possible. This was on top of tens of billions of dollars the U.S. has given in aid to Israel in the last 5 years. That's Biden, mostly.
And don't forget where Israel got the materials to build their nuclear weapons. Don't forget that when you're remembering things. But Samira told me she was horrified to see the effects of Israel's attacks. They are hitting civilians over and over. Sounds like an MO for Israel. You know? So, but
Mitra, an artist in central Tehran who asked to be identified by a pseudonym for safety reasons due to her involvement in the Iran's protest movement, said the experience of facing Israeli missiles had underscored for her how connected the lives of Iranians are to Palestinians. The buzzing of drones and military aircraft above our heads doesn't stop. For 20 months, we heard these sounds in videos from Gaza. Now they're above our heads. Our story isn't separate from theirs. Images of pulverized homes and bodies found in the rubble have underscored the connection. They've also mobilized Iranians, many of whom strongly condemn their own government's repressive policies against Israel and its wars across the region. Mitra was an active participant in the Women, Life, Freedom movement, protesting against Iran's government for its repressive political and social policies. But she rejects claims that Israel is somewhat defending Iranians from their government. Israeli bombs will not bring us freedom, she told Truthout.
Remember, the head of that movement was an active fucking U.S. intelligence agent. Just saying.
Right.
You know. Figured I should put that in before people come after me. I don't support the regime change there. Thank you very much.
There's growing fear that if Israel continues attacking nuclear sites, it might eventually hit something. Locals in Esfahan, Han, who spoke to Truthout, expressed fear that an Israeli attack can lead to nuclear radiation spreading across the region. Actually, that's what I thought about first, to be quite honest. Like, and it's not only Iranians in Iran who have been targeted. Around 4 million Afghans live in Iran, and they too find themselves on the receiving end of Israeli bombs. In a viral video, an Afghan born and raised in Iran said that some of his Iranian friends told him he was lucky he had another country to flee to. His response was that he would stay, fight, and die alongside his Iranian compatriots if that's what it came to. So far, the United States has failed to intervene to stop Israel, and it's hard to see how the war will halt without Trump doing so. US or UN condemnation and an arms embargo on Israel might be able to convince Netanyahu to stand down, but so far, there is little sign of either.
Yep.
More like never, I would say. The result is a terrifying level of uncertainty in Tehran. It is also pushing many Iranians to rally behind their country's military resistance against Israel. Battered from all sides, they feel that Iran's only option is to defend itself. Many of us hate the government, but Israel is bombing us. It's making Iranians more nationalistic, Kamar told me over the phone. Israel's attacks are bringing people together unlike ever before. Which I would almost argue that's what they want.
Yeah.
Like, as an excuse to keep it up.
Right.
So, meanwhile, Iranians across the country are burying their dead. Their death toll is rising day by day. At last count, it's reached at least 250 people. One of those victims is Parina Asabi, a 24-year-old poet who was killed alongside her family in an Israeli attack on Tehran. A picture circulating of her body crushed under the concrete rubble of her home, blood pouring out of her head. Also circulating was some of the poems she had published. One was translated into English by Palmanar Press. Its words are devastating, like a prediction of the way her life was cut short. I wept for you, for both. I wept for both, for you and for me. You blow at the stars, my tears. In your world, the freedom of light. In mine, the chase of shadows. The most beautiful poem in the world falls quiet. You begin somewhere to cry. The murmur of life. But I will end, I burn. I'll be that extinguished star, like your sky, like smoke. By Monday, June 17th, Iranians were coming to terms with the fact that Israel's war would not be ending anytime soon. Israeli bombs struck Iran's official TV headquarters while journalists were on air, causing an unknown number of casualties. Airstrikes pounded Tehran, and Iran continued to lob missiles back towards Israel. Israel's military ordered residents to flee homes in Tehran's District Free, an area that's home to around 300,000 people. Highways jammed with cars as families left for rural areas they thought might be safer. But shortages at gas stations hindered many people who hoped to flee. With no way out, they hunkered down at home, waiting for morning and praying that their stars would not be extinguished in the dark of night.
Yep.
Any thoughts before we continue?
No,
with
not necessarily. So here's Fee. She writes, the paradox: if Iran had provable nukes, Israel wouldn't have attacked. This isn't about nukes for Israel and Washington, their go-to excuse for decades, but to weaken Tehran by murdering top officials and targeting from within. If that fails, Israel's Samson option is always on the table. I hope that's understood by Tehran. Diplomacy is a fine strategy when there's a sliver of morality. Not the case here. They showed as much time and time again. No amount of diplomacy will... Go ahead.
Go ahead, you finish.
No amount of diplomacy
know what I'm going to say.
will deter Israel or its major allies and U.S. British intel from the goal of Greater Israel. Nukes ensure Iran's survival, not hinder it. You were saying?
I'm sure you know what I'm going to say.
Sure. The classic, when peaceful protest is useful when your enemy has morality, right?
Something like that.
Who's this quote? I forget this quote.
Well, Kwame Ture, kind of, but he said in order for I'm not sure it's diplomacy, but in order for diplomacy, I'm going to say diplomacy.
I think it's peaceful protest.
Right. In order for diplomacy to work, the people involved must have a conscience.
Right.
And in this case,
yeah.
Right. So
the United States has done. No, I was thinking that too. But Iran, in Fee's opinion, must not only continue doing what they can to keep the West and the great and little Satan at bay. Why stop now? This is the time, and they must actually attain these weapons against perhaps the advisory of their allies who are being tapped to de-escalate. Diplomatic allies who do have relationships with Israel and the Gulf as well. More on that later. Without holding the line and continuing their research, they are at risk, and so is Yemen. I think most Iranians at home understand this, and we know who's got nukes and who's used and is willing to use them. They'll vilify Iran anyway, so that excuse is gone. At the risk of sounding like advocating for weapons, the truth is, as long as Israel and the West have them, no one is safe. Especially the last one on the list, given to General Wesley Clark. Iran can't do it alone. I hope lessons were learned from Syria. An alliance of those ideologically on the same page is needed. And I am also hoping we don't see more trust placed on those who've broken it time and time again. So, Robert in Lakesh, Israel's attack on Iran isn't about nukes. It is about Iran's support for Palestine and groups that fight for the Palestinians. Israel knows it can't destroy Iran's nuclear facilities fully. The Israeli goal has always been regime change. So, Ahmed Eden, I hope I got that right. Tell me again, who is the nuclear threat to peace and stability? P.S. It's estimated Israel has between 90 to 400 warheads. We don't know because they are lying about having them, much they like they lie about everything else. So, again, just that little piece has the nukes. Everywhere else don't.
Mm-hmm.
So I wonder who's the aggressor there. But here's Fee. Exposed Washington and Israel, specifically Bibi, have been claiming that Iran is close to possessing nukes since 1996. And here's the receipts.
The deadline for attaining this goal is getting extremely close. And Iran, by the way, is also outpacing Iraq in the development of ballistic missile systems that they hope will reach the eastern seaboard of the United States within 15 years.
In 2002,
next spring, at most, by next summer, at current enrichment rates,
2012,
finished the medium enrichment.
Get a new graphic guy, BB, by the way.
Final stage. From there, it's only a few months, possibly a few weeks.
Pictures.
Fucking cartoon flip art bomb
for the first
he
bomb.
printed off.
The foremost sponsor of global terrorism
2015
could be weeks away from having enough enriched uranium for an entire arsenal of nuclear weapons.
And that two-page was bad back then.
Islamic terror regime.
You
weeks
know,
away from having
the comb over is looking thin.
For an entire arsenal of nuclear bombs.
If not stopped, Iran could produce a nuclear weapon in a very short time. It could be a year.
2025.
Within a few months, less than a year.
So they've been doing this for a minute. Just in case people didn't know. Vanessa Beeley, the United States quietly delivered hundreds of advanced laser-guided missiles to the Israeli regime, knowing that the projectiles would be used by it towards attacking Iran. The Middle East Eye News and Analysis website carried the report on Saturday, identifying its sources as U.S. officials, naming the projectiles in question as air-to-surface Hellfire missiles. There is a time and place for Hellfires. They were useful to Israel as it was seeking to strike the Islamic Republic, a senior American military official told the website. The U.S. also provided the regime with the missiles, knowing that their features specifically armed Tel Aviv for surgical strikes, it added. Also on Friday, the president himself confirmed in remarks to Reuters that he and his team knew the attacks were coming. We knew everything, Donald Trump said. Observers, meanwhile, note that the reports of Washington's unstinting arms support aimed at further equipping the regime to better target the Islamic Republic have emerged, despite the United States being engaged in indirect talks with Iran, ostensibly to give diplomacy a chance. The ME further reported that the Trump administration had prior knowledge of the plan for months. In case you didn't know, But here's Fee again. Trump gives a press briefing on Iran and signals war. Notice how he speaks in ambiguous terms to ensure manipulation.
Look, they should have made the deal. I had a great deal for them. They should have made that deal. 60 days we talked about it, and in the end they decided not to do it, and now they wish they did it. And they want to meet, but it's a little late to meet, but they want to meet, and they want to come to the White House. They'll even come to the White House, so we'll see. I may do that, but it's a shame it could have been done the easy way.
You haven't made a decision yet on what to do?
I have ideas as to what to do, but I haven't made a final. I like to make the final decision 1 second before it's due, because things change. I mean, especially with war. Things change with war. It can go from one extreme to the other. War is very bad. There was no reason for this to be a war. There was no reason for Russia, Ukraine. A lot of wars there was no reason for. Look, they should have made the deal. I had a great deal for them. They should have made that deal. 60 days we talked about it, and in the end they decided not to do it, and now they wish they did it. And they want to meet, but it's it's a little late to meet, but they want to meet, and they want to come to the White House. They'll even come to the White House. So we'll see. I may do that, but it's a shame it could have been done the easy way.
You haven't made a decision yet on what to do?
I have ideas as to what to do, but I haven't made a final. I like to make the final decision 1 second before it's due, because things change. I mean,
Yeah. So, more bullshit. Sam Husseini, Trump pretended to be against the Iraq invasion so he could do this. Most of the pundits pretending to care about Gaza a month ago were only doing it so they can enable the empire on Iran. Most of the pundits being critical on Iran now are largely doing so they can enable targeting China. Trust those who deserve trust. Be a stooge yourself. Again, as I stated months ago, Putin reiterated Russia's strategic military partnership with Iran does not include defense. Russia offered to work on air defense systems, but he said Tehran wasn't keen. So here's Putin. We once offered our Iranian friends to work on air defense, but they weren't too interested. So that was that. As far as the strategic partnership treaty, it doesn't include any defense-related articles. Our Iranian friends aren't even asking about this, so there's really nothing to discuss. So I find it interesting that Iran's not even asking, So I don't know if they're getting that same deal with China necessarily. There's been some talks of China sending them munitions, but I don't know that to be true. So, but FI confirms Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Andrei Rudenko said a U.S. attack on Iran would bring dire consequences for the region, and while Moscow would offer to help in negotiations, they would not be obligated to aid Tehran in the event of an attack, right? So January, they signed this treaty, right, which was just ratified by the State Duma not too long ago. However, as FI outlines in February, the treaty, unlike the North Korea treaty, did not include mutual intervention in case of an attack, right? So right down there, subject to aggression, the other party would not provide any military or other assistance. So just in case you were wondering, but FI's going to give you the analysis. This clearly means that Iran is not counting on any intervention from Moscow in case of a U.S. attack, but further, it could also point to Russia's incoming role in West Asia. Russia has always tried to be a neutral actor in the region. However, we know neutrality at such a time is certainly a stand on one side, especially when it comes to Israel. Recently, Russia state media and U.S. media reporting that Putin agreed with Trump that Iran should never be in a position to destroy Israel. I've discussed ad nauseum the connections between Russia and Israel culturally as well as regionally. Add to this Israel's vouching for Russia to keep its Syrian bases before the U.S. government because it prefers Russia to Turkey's growing influence. Turkey also been lousy with Russia and made it dependent in some ways due to the Black Sea grain corridor. But now, if and as soon as a truce with Washington over Ukraine clears, the partnership with Ankara will lessen in many ways. Also, with Syria gone, it leaves Tehran vulnerable with a sizable sector of reformists seeking to normalize with the U.S., while the other half does not want this and will urge a standoff. Tehran has to act, but at the same time, it's walking a tightrope. So, while the U.S. has been pushing war with Tehran, it will, in FI's opinion, attempt regime change first. If that doesn't work, count on them as insane enough to try to attack, because now they know some will stand back. Russia has always said they follow the UN Charter and has stated it so in this treaty. However, we all know who the UN represents and is controlled by. We know the international law has been barren of any teeth against the genocidal Zionist entity, as we have covered extensively here as well. So, what seems clear to be is that the non-aligned axis, not so aligned. Some fight for ideals while others are fighting for pragmatic national interests and gain. Unfortunately, that doesn't bode well for anyone beside the West, and especially for Gaza or people of the entire region, who, if I may say so, should understand they need rely on only on themselves. As for Russia, they're still fighting a war and being thrown a lousy deal with huge disrespect and arrogance, and as a U.S. American well-versed in U.S. empire, they best tread carefully if any deals are made with such devils, as now, much like Iran, Moscow's held in high symbolic regard by many watching these events unfold. Any questions? No?
No.
So I brought this a bit, which is from Husseini, saying that AP reports today that Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz said if Iranian Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei continues to fire missiles at the Israeli home front, Tehran will burn. This is clearly a nuclear threat. Israel has a nuclear weapons arsenal, though it is incredibly avoided. I believe Iran was the only nation to mention it at the UNSC meeting yesterday. Israel has a nuclear weapons arsenal, though it is incredibly avoided. Longtime independent activist and writer John Steinbeck has done extensive work on nuclear weapons and Israel's nuclear weapons in particular. His '08 paper, The Israeli Nuclear Weapons Program, spells out much regarding Israel's policy. He said today, Israel's nuclear threat may not be directed not so much at Iran and other states through what is sometimes called the Samson option, but also to compel the United States government through non-conventional compliance. This is at odds with arguments that have been made by analysts like John Mearsheimer that Iran has escalatory dominance because they have claimed nuclear weapons are not usable. These Israeli schemes were apparently hatched after the 1956 crisis in which the US and USSR used Uniting for Peace at the UN to compel Israel, Britain, and France to withdraw from the Sinai and Gaza. They figured, well, we better have some fucking nukes in our pocket. So, from Steinbeck's in-depth paper, the aftermath of the 1956 Suez Crisis precipitated top-secret talks that cemented and accelerated the Israeli-French nuclear collaboration. From its inception in the 1950s, Israeli scientists were active partners in the French nuclear weapons program, including development and testing, and providing critical nuclear expertise. The current Israeli nuclear program should be understood largely as an extension of this earlier collaboration. The United States became aware of the Dimona construction in the late 1960s, and the outgoing Eisenhower administration demanded an explanation. The official response was that Dimona was for peaceful purposes, including scientific, industrial, and medical. In reality, the sole purpose of the Dimona plant was to produce nuclear bombs. Israel used its nuclear arsenal not just in the context of deterrent or of direct warfighting, but in other more subtle but no less important ways. For example, the possession of weapons of mass destruction can be a powerful lever to maintain the status quo or to influence events to Israel's perceived advantage, such as protect the so-called moderate Arab states from internal insurrection, or to intervene in inter-Arab warfare. In Israeli strategic jargon, this concept is called non-conventional compliance, exemplified by a quote from Shimon Peres. Acquiring a superior weapon system would mean the possibility of using it for compellent purposes, that is, forcing the other side to accept Israeli political demands, which presumably include a demand that the traditional status quo be accepted and a peace treaty signed. So that might be explaining why a lot of Arab countries seem to be allies with them. But
Right.
Israeli nuclear weapons were important in encouraging Arab realism. They were instrumental in bringing Egyptian President Anwar Sadat to Jerusalem in 1977, and may have been even more important in convincing other Arabs, particularly the Palestinians, to recognize that the Arab-Israeli conflict could not be resolved by the sword. From a slightly different perspective, neoconservative writer Robert Tucker asked what would prevent Israel from pursuing a hawkish policy employing a nuclear deterrent to freeze the status quo, which is what happened. Discussing the Israeli nuclear compliance doctrine, dissident historian Israel Shahak further observed Israel is preparing for a war, nuclear if need be, and for the sake of averting domestic change not to its liking, if it occurs in some of the Middle Eastern states. So, another major use of the Israeli bomb is to compel the U.S. to act in Israel's favor, even when it runs counter to its own strategic interests. As early as 1956, Francis Perrin, head of the French A-bomb project, wrote, "We thought the Israeli bomb was aimed at the Americans, not to launch it at the Americans, but to say, if you don't want to help us in a critical situation, we will require you to help us. Otherwise, we will use our nukes." During the 1973 war, Israel used nuclear blackmail to force Kissinger and Nixon to airlift massive amounts of military hardware to Israel. The Israeli ambassador, Simcha Dintz, is quoted as saying at the time, "It is a massive airlift to Israel does not start immediately, then I will know that the U.S. is reneging on its purposes and we will have to draw very serious conclusions." John Steinbeck does not believe this means Israel holds all the cards. Iran is a big, widely dispersed country. Israel cannot sustain itself. The U.S. and Israel are conducting an offensive operation. The U.S. and Israeli governments are desperate and must conform to global will. So I also brought this, right? This is from George Hazim, right, who we brought last week, right? And he writes, "What's proven to be historic and humiliating turn for Israel's Zionist regime, Iran has dealt a blow not just to Israeli infrastructure, but to the very foundation of its psychological warfare. The illusions of supremacy and impunity has collapsed in real time. Israel's cyber-assisted strike on Iranian military and nuclear infrastructure was supposed to be a game changer, executed in tandem with a sophisticated cyber attack that disabled Iran's air defense system for approximately 8 hours. The operation was designed to disorient, disrupt, and dominate. It failed spectacularly. Within 10 hours, Iranian technicians restored their systems. By hour 12, the first wave of Iranian ballistic missiles rained down across Israel, targeting military command hubs, critical intelligence sites, and notably, the Weizmann Institute of Science in Rehovot. The Iron Dome, long held up as a marvel of modern defense, was useless. The U.S. deployed THAAD systems guarding the IDF's military headquarters also failed under the barrage. This wasn't just an act of retaliation, it was an unveiling. But the world already knew the Iron Dome was just a plastic bubble. Iran demonstrated that last year with its responses to the attacks and assassinations on one of its top IRGC generals and killing of staff at the consulate in Damascus with its retaliatory strikes of Operation True Promise 1 and 2. Operation True Promise 3 is, as Iran said, would be more devastating and frighteningly destructive. Israel's model of warfare has also been preemptive, provocative, and deeply reliant on its assumption of strategic superiority. From assassinating Iranian scientists to bombing airfields in Syria and flattening apartment blocks in Gaza, Israel's actions have consistently escaped consequences. It fights with without fear of retaliation, armed with American munitions and diplomatic impunity. Its strategy depends on hitting others, but never being hit. Israel's doctrine of one-sided warfare is now bankrupt. The retaliatory strikes by Iran did more than damage Israel's infrastructure. They shattered the myth that Israel is untouchable. What we are witnessing is not just a military failure, but an existential crisis for the Zionist regime. Its greatest weapon, fear, no longer works. For over 2 decades, Iran has been the target of sabotage, assassinations, and relentless threats of regime change while remaining within the limits of the JCPOA. Tehran has shown remarkable restraint, even when its generals were murdered and its scientists were killed on Iranian soil. It's evident Iran's restraint has brought no peace. Instead, it has emboldened Israel to take even more dangerous steps, convinced of its own invulnerability. The message is clear. Non-nuclear nations have no real sovereignty in the eyes of the West or its proxies. In this reality, Iran has only one path to ensure its security: nuclear deterrence, not as a weapon of aggression, but as the sole viable shield against perpetual threats from a nuclear-armed neighbor with a record of regional destruction. Israel's refusal to sign the Non-Proliferation Treaty while stockpiling nuclear warheads under U.S. protection is a provocation. Its demand that Iran remain non-nuclear while it carries out military strikes across sovereign borders, is not just hypocritical, it's suicidal policy by design. Iran's nuclear pursuit is no longer about prestige, it is about survival. The U.S. is no longer the force it once was, as Washington scrambles to maintain control in Ukraine. It has now begun diverting munitions and air defense systems intended for Kyiv to Israel, highlighting an overstretched empire trying to prop up too many proxies at once. Russia, meanwhile, has made clear that it stands behind Iran through the January 17th Partnership Agreement. Article 3 of the pact ensures that neither party will assist an aggressor. Article 5 lays the groundwork for expanded military cooperation. This is not theory, this is strategy in motion. Iran's alliances with Russia and China and a constellation of anti-imperial actors in the global south has repositioned it from isolated pariah to pivotal power. In contrast, Israel's reliance on American production and European silence is growing brittle. This war is not just about missiles, it is about whose order defines the Middle East and who has the courage to defy it. Again, we covered it a bit ago. I don't know if they do have military cooperation there, right? So we'll see how that plays out. But for the first time in its modern history, Israel is being hit in a way it cannot hide. Social media is flooded with footage of Iranian missiles striking with impunity. The startup nation now finds itself scrambling to explain why its expensive defense systems failed, why its most protected military sites were breached, and why its population is suddenly experiencing the fears it inflicted on others for decades. The strategic tide is turning. What we're seeing is not just retaliation, it's the beginning of recalibration. A region exhausted by Israeli impunity has finally seen that the Zionist regime bleeds, and that changes everything. In the words of Arnold Schwarzenegger, if it bleeds, we can kill it. Shout out to the Predator movies. But anything you got to say before we end on this nightmare?
As you said, it is, so.
Yeah. So, just remember.
Our president will start a war with Iran because he has absolutely no ability to negotiate. He's weak and he's ineffective.
In case you were wondering how that plays out. But anyway, anything you say to the people before we get out of this segment? Mossad got bombed, apparently. The Mossad building.
Yeah.
So there's that. You know.
Let's hope there's not going to be a draft.
Or a fucking nuke. That's what I'm hoping for. Please, no nukes. Please put those away. Step away from the red button. Just fucking sit down. Calm down. Anyway, just ridiculous. Well, talking about these things is why YouTube has demonetized us. So you can scan that QR code or go to ko-fi.com/indienewsnetwork if you like to support us outside of that system. But if your times are tough, money's tight, just like and subscribe, hit the share button, send this to your friends. It's the only way it's seen. Otherwise, leave a comment. Let us know what you think. Is your nuclear bunker prepared? You might need it sooner than later. But otherwise, thanks for watching.